The United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly yesterday to pass a non-binding resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Let's take a watch.
The result of the vote is as follows: 153 in favor, 10 against, 23 abstentions. Draft Resolution A/ES10/L27 has been adopted.
A number of countries in Europe, including Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, voted to abstain from the vote, while the United States and Israel, of course, voted against the measure. The vote comes as many aid groups warn that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is unprecedented.
As Glenn Greenwald tweeted, 6 leaders of different aid groups who have worked in every recent major war zone and humanitarian crisis say there's nothing that compares to Gaza in terms of the sheer level of civilian suffering and destruction to civil society. One such case showing sickening disregard for human life reported in Israeli outlet Haaretz. The outlet wrote that the IDF Operations Directorate's influencing department, which is responsible for psychological warfare operations against the enemy and foreign audiences, operates a Telegram channel called 72 Virgins Uncensored, which targets Israeli audiences and shows the bodies of Hamas terrorists with the promise of shattering the terrorist fantasy.
Here to discuss is international lawyer and advocacy officer with Al-Haq, Ahmed Abuful. Ahmed, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you talk to us first and foremost about the nature of this Telegram channel? For American audience, what is a Telegram channel, and what is the nature of the imagery that's contained within, and why has it gone so viral?
Well, the information is reaching from Gaza, including in Telegram channels, is usually information from the ground. And usually as a human rights organization, we use different platforms and different methods to verify the information that is reaching. And I can assure you the verified information that reaches us from Gaza is beyond horrifying, even for people like us who spend their lives working in this field and on this particular situation. And that's why you see the reactions from heads of humanitarian organizations around the world writing a piece together in the New York Times saying that this is something like we've seen before. You see the Secretary General of the UN saying that we're witnessing an unparalleled level of killing and destruction in Gaza. It's beyond horrifying. But it's also important to note, if you allow me, that the current situation, as the Secretary General did not happen in a vacuum. The history did not start on the 7th of October, nor the Palestinian suffering started then. This is the result of 75 years of dispossession and oppression, of settler colonialism and apartheid imposed against the Palestinian people as a whole. This is also the result of 56 years of occupation. Israel's occupation is the longest in modern history. The fact that this was allowed to continue is a stain on humanity, and this is allowed to continue with U.S. tax money. And this is also the result of 16-year-long suffocating medieval-like blockade on the Gaza Strip, where you have 2.3 million Palestinians living in around 360 square meters. This is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. To give your audience and your viewers an idea how difficult the situation was already before the war, the UN has published a report in 2012 expecting that Gaza will be unlivable by 2020. Now we're 3 years past that, with complete siege and heavy indiscriminate bombardment on civilians, the equivalent of more than 2 Hiroshima nuclear bombs. If you allow me to give you just some statistics about how horrific the situation is and the intensity and the indiscriminate nature of Israel's attack. In the first month alone, the ratio of Israel's killing in Gaza was that Israel kills 1 Palestinian every 4 minutes. Israel kills 6 children and 4 women every hour. In the first week alone, Israel bombed Gaza with more than the US bombed Afghanistan in a whole year. In the first 25 days alone, Israel killed and injured civilians in Gaza more than those in Ukraine by the Russian invasion. So far, Israel has killed in Gaza double the number of those killed in the Serbian genocide, the Srebrenica genocide of Bosnian Muslims. Save the Children, a reputable organization, has said that the number of children killed in Gaza has already exceeded the number of children killed in all conflict areas around the world since 2019. It's a stain on humanity that such barbaric cruelty against civilians, such televised carnage is not only allowed, but sometimes justified and rationalized. It's also regrettable and I think shameful that the US still cannot do the bare minimum of human decency, that is to call for a ceasefire. A true leadership, is about consistent application of international law, to be able to apply it to your friends and your foes alike. Selective application of international law, double standards, and hypocrisy not only dehumanize the Palestinians and allow the genocide being committed against them, but also undermine the whole body of international law that, to a certain extent, provided stability after World War II. And if we were to undermine this system, then we have a very dark future ahead of us. And also, one final thing, allow me to say, in our region, what is also at stake is the credibility of the U.S. And the U.S.'s reputation as it portrays itself as a country that promotes human rights, while at the same time we see that Israel continues to commit crimes, and the U.S. has made it clear that Israel is not listening and continue to kill civilians. But at the same time, the U.S. continues to send weapons to Israel. So I talked to you, and I lost 10 members of my family. Just before this interview, I received another call that probably another number has been killed. We still don't know the number, but one of our cousins, a paramedic, was targeted in his home with his family, and I still cannot verify the number. So I will never know, like many Palestinians around the world, including Palestinian Americans, for example, if American tax money killed my family, or another American Palestinian will never know, and that is it is likely that their tax money is killing their families in Gaza. This is preposterous. It must stop now, and the U.S. must come back to its senses and act like a true leader and prevent such a carnage.
We're so sorry for your loss, Ahmed.
Yes, very sorry to hear that. Obviously, the images we see of people killed in Gaza is heart-wrenching and is awful. I wondered if you could talk to us more about what you and your organization view as the framework for a ceasefire. Obviously, from the Israeli perspective, there is a lot of public will among the people in Israel to continue a war against Hamas, given what happened on October 7th, and they are committed to the total defeat and destruction of Hamas. Hamas also has promised to engage in further October 7th until its political goals are met. So while it might be ideal from an outsider perspective for a ceasefire, I would certainly hope for the violence to end. If both participants in the conflict don't want there to be a ceasefire, what can we accomplish outside in the rest of the world, in the chambers of the UN, or if U.S. policies? I would be perfectly happy to have it stop funding Israel and Ukraine and anyone else. But how do we move toward a ceasefire when both sides of the conflict want exactly what's happening now?
Yeah, first of all, if you would be kind enough to allow me to correct, it is not that both sides don't want ceasefire. It's only Israel who doesn't want a ceasefire. And to say that a ceasefire will not prevent further escalation, I think would be a little bit naive, because previous escalations, previous hostilities and assaults on the Gaza Strip, all of them ended with a ceasefire, ended with agreements with Hamas, many of which Israel violated unprovoked, and start attacking Gaza again. I think the very narrative to claim that the problem in the Palestinian context is Hamas is quite, I think, superficial, simply because Hamas was created and emerged under the Israeli occupation in 1987. Israel occupied Palestinian territory in 1967. There were 20 years before even Hamas existed, and we still didn't have peace. We had a prolonged occupation, a continuing building of colonial illegal settlements in the West Bank. And mentioning the West Bank, nowadays we don't have Hamas in the West Bank. Why Israel continue to build illegal settlements? Why Israel imposes an apartheid regime in the Palestinians and the Palestinian people as a whole? Why Israel continue to kill Palestinian children every day, almost on a daily basis in the West Bank? We have been documenting a rise of settler violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank that is more than 133% more pogroms and targeting of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank is taking place under the protection of the Israeli army. We have racist ministers in the Israeli government like Ben-Gvir, who has been distributing weapons on settlers. So settlers carry weapons and arms openly and conduct pogroms in the West Bank, killing the Palestinians, and there's no Hamas there. How do you justify that? So I think it's quite superficial to portray the situation as only Hamas. And the solution to that is a political solution. It's not a military solution. Palestinians are not colonial subjects. And we're not begging for our rights. We're entitled to those rights, and we will have them. We will become free. We believe our freedom is inevitable. And what we try to do as human rights organizations is to minimize the suffering of people. You asked me about civil society. And as you know, Israel has designated 2 years ago 6 Palestinian civil society organizations, including human rights organizations like the one I am proudly affiliated with, as quote unquote terrorist organizations. So you have now an Israeli government that targets civil society, human rights organizations, and describe them as terrorists. When the Palestinians decide to go to courts, like any civilized nations, they decide to go to the International Criminal Court to have accountability, Israel described it as pure anti-Semitism. When the Palestinians decide to go to the International Court of Justice, the principal organ of the United Nations, Israel describes it as diplomatic terror. So obviously, any form of rejection and dissent and opposition to Israel's racist policy is being labeled as terrorism and is being denounced. Notably, Palestinians have tried everything. In 2018, they marched the borders peacefully, as what some would describe Gandhi or Mandela style, and they were all shot. Several young people lost their limbs because of Israeli snipers shooting at their knees and at their elbows, and the Commission of Inquiry concluded that war crimes were committed. Israeli soldiers were killing Palestinians for sport, and they were recording this on video. There's evidence to that. So how do you justify that either? So the Palestinians tried everything, tried peaceful demonstrations, tried to agree on the Oslo Accord, which, for your information, the Palestinians has agreed only on 22% of historic Palestine. I don't believe any nation in the world has ever made such a compromise for a better future for their children and the children of the Israelis. But was Israel happy with that? No. Israel continued building settlements. Netanyahu, the one that you described that you want the Palestinians to find a political solution with, he made it clearly. He said there will never be a Palestinian state. So you're dealing with someone who doesn't view as equal human beings, who issue genocidal statements against the Palestinian people, and then the American administration want to turn the other side, act blind, and say, well, we want to work for a two-state solution. There's no symmetry here. There's no two sides to this conflict. There is occupier and occupied. There's colonizer and colonized. And that is.
Let me ask you this.
Israel is the aggressor. Yes.
Let me ask you this. You talked about all of the activity, the protest, what Palestinians did to try to achieve their political rights over the past decades. You suggested that didn't work. And so now Hamas has done this terrorist attack on Israel, killing hundreds of people, including many civilians, women and children, et cetera. Was that the right course of action? Is that a course of action that is going to lead toward Palestinian rights? It looks to me like that's a course of action that has directly resulted now in thousands of innocent Palestinian deaths as Israel engages in its response. So was this a good course of action?
Well, first of all, let me just make it clear. There's nothing in the world justifies what's happening at the moment in Gaza. This is at the outset. And the second thing I want to say that clearly Hamas is not the representative of the Palestinian people. The representative of the Palestinian people is the PLO, is the Palestine Liberation Organization. Guess what? It's also labeled as terrorist by Israel. This is the PLO that signed the Oslo Accords. So to make this clear at the outset, and then the other point I want to comment on, I think the usage of the word terrorism has been used for political reasons for decades, especially in the context of the right to self-determination. Now, the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation in any way possible. That's up to them to choose which way, but it has to be in compliance with international humanitarian law. Therefore, civilians must never be targeted, whether by Palestinians, by Israelis, or any other nation. Palestinian civilians must be protected at all times, and those who target civilians must be held accountable. I hope I'm making myself as clear as it could ever be. Those who target civilians must be held accountable, but must be held accountable by an independent investigative body, not by Israel. Because Israel has a history of pathologically lying and trying to shield those responsible from any meaningful accountability. Let me give example to that. As a matter of fact, Israel has killed several Palestinian Americans, including the veteran journalist, your colleague, and you're also a fellow American who was killed by the Israeli army. Israel first lied, said the Palestinian killed him. Then when investigation showed that it was an Israeli soldier, sniper, who shot her, Israel said, well, possibly. And then Israel admitted, but guess what? Israel said, no one will be held accountable. So those who commit crimes, regardless of the nationality of the perpetrator, must be held accountable, but must be held accountable by an international independent body that investigate those crimes. And I would urge you and all our viewers to be very cautious with this term of terrorism and the right of self-determination. Do I need to remind you that Nelson Mandela was labeled as terrorist and remained on the U.S. Terrorist list until 2008? Did that make Nelson Mandela a terrorist? Of course not. I don't think any sane person would say Nelson Mandela was a terrorist.
Ahmed, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.